Hello, happy March. February just ended, and so even though right now it is technically Women's History Month, I'm going to talk about the 3 biographies that I read for Black History Month in the month of February. I'm thinking that this year, just to be a super huge nerd about it, I'm going to read 3 biographies for each of the heritage months, you know, Black History Month, Women's History Month, AAPI Heritage Month, that sort of thing. And so I read 3 biographies of notable figures in Black history for the month of February, and I'm also going to start working on that for Women's History Month in March as well. So up first, we have The Three Mothers by Anna Malika Tubbs. This is definitely the biography that I would recommend the most widely to people. It's very quick and easy to read. It presents a lot of really important background information for all of the events that are taking place, and I think it's very approachable, gives a very understandable perspective on history, especially for someone who maybe doesn't read history so much or doesn't know very much about this era in American civil rights. This book is all about the mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And these women are Alberta King, Louise Little, and Berdis Baldwin. I actually gave this one a slightly lower rating than the other 2 that I'll be talking about today, because as the author herself admits, there's just not that much information out there about these women. And I'm just a real geek about history, and I want to really dig in and know every single thing about these eras and these people that you can possibly find. There wasn't really enough for me to feel really satisfied with what this book had to present about these women. However, there were still so many things that I learned about these families, the factors that went into how these women raised their sons, the values that they instilled in their children, and the circumstances that they worked with in order to survive, and the racial politics and strife and violence as well. I will say, actually, I was going to say this book, actually all 3 books that I'm going to be talking about today involve pretty difficult descriptions of violence, but I would really encourage everyone to engage with that kind of violence just as a fact and history and things that real people have had to witness and endure or not endure and have their lives taken through horrific violence. It's a part of every nation's history. Every nation's history contains really upsetting violence and oppression, and I think it's important to reckon with that and to encourage empathy and understanding of people who have been through such horrific events. I was especially struck by the way that it talked about the family of Martin Luther King Jr. I think America often talks about Dr. King's life as like the happy result of the civil rights movement, that, oh, he was killed, or he died, but because of all of his work, now things are so much better in America and we don't have to worry so much about racism anymore. But first of all, there's so many things that we are continuing to fight in this nation. And also, even just Martin Luther King's murder didn't end the difficulty that even just his family had to face, the violence that his family had to face, obviously. Because what I never knew, what I had never learned when learning about the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was that after he was assassinated, his mother was shot while sitting at the organ of the church that she and her husband ran. And she died. She died in the hospital afterwards. They killed his mom. They killed her. And then also his brother drowned under suspicious circumstances. Oh, I'm getting all hunched over and like stressed. I was like, oh, what are they doing? Okay. And I just can't believe that that's not part of the narrative that we tell about the King family, that this had such a huge impact on them, and it didn't stop. It didn't stop with the assassination of Dr. King, and it hasn't stopped. There's still so many things that we need to address, that we need to fix, that we need to talk about. There's so much more I can say. This video is either going to be like 15 minutes long or it's going to be like an hour long. There's so much I could say, and I want to be really careful and really sensitive about these kinds of topics. So just for now, I will say, if you want a place to start learning about the civil rights movement, learning about the women who shaped the lives of 2 great civil rights leaders and one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, is a really great place to start. Just understanding what people's lives were like, what the country was like, what politics were like. And I just thought this was a really good place to start about those topics. Up next, we have The Odyssey of Phillis Wheatley by David Waldstreicher. This one I loved so much, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend because it's pretty long. It's so intricately detailed. It is so detailed. The author is a professor of history very much a historian, and he goes into every possible record in Boston in the late 1700s in order to just get every tidbit that can possibly be gleaned about the life of Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley was the first person of African descent to have work published in English, and this happened while she was still enslaved in the household of a family in the city of Boston in the 1770s. Her work was very widely known throughout the American colonies at the time, and including was well known and discussed by the founding fathers. Which I kind of wish I'd known more about. I know there's another book that's specifically about Phillis Wheatley and Thomas Jefferson and examining that, not quite relationship, because I don't think did they ever meet? Not that I can remember, there was a lot of information in this book. But about the dynamic between Phillis Wheatley and Thomas Jefferson. And so I wish there'd been a bit more about how the founding fathers understood the work of Phillis Wheatley. This book goes very in depth with historical records to understand what Phillis Wheatley's life was like, the impact of her writing, both like the words themselves, like what she actually wrote, and also the fact that she was an enslaved African woman who was producing incredible, deeply moving, intricate works of poetry, kind of what that meant for people's understanding of American slavery, especially since so many white people believed that slavery was acceptable because Black people are inherently inferior. So Phillis Wheatley and her abilities, her brilliance, really challenged that idea of like, oh, look what this African woman can achieve while still enslaved, and the questions that brought up. And yet slavery continued for so many decades after that. There's also a lot of really in-depth literary analysis of Phillis Wheatley's poems. So it's this really interesting combination of historical narrative and really scholarly literary analysis. And so that's why I would kind of caution anyone interested in the life of Phillis Wheatley. This is like the only biography of Phillis Wheatley I could find. I really wanted to learn about her life. There is the one about Phillis Wheatley and Thomas Jefferson that I found that I was like, I just want something that focuses on her and what her life was like. But this one is very scholarly. It's very dense. It can be quite dry at times, which I was eating up because I just want to know all of those hard facts, all of those little tiny details about shipping records and newspapers and all these things. But it's not, this is not going to be one of those nonfiction books that critics will describe on the back as like fiercely readable or anything like that. It is hard to read. It took me a really long time to read. Listen, I kind of want to describe it as a slog, but I did like it. Oh man, just this really academic analysis of the poetry that she wrote. But it did definitely give me that appreciation for everything that she produced and the kind of writer that she was. And that there were a lot of misperceptions of Phillis Wheatley as a writer and what she produced, particularly in periods of the civil rights movement. There were certain things that she said or phrased that made it seem like she was excusing or forgiving slavery. But this analysis really goes deeply into the world that she was living in and the context that she was writing in, because there were certain conventions and traditions and ways that people were writing and speaking at the time. And so by looking at it in a lens of her time period, her society that she was living in, how people were discussing certain topics, it really explains that she was touching a lot on ideas of freedom, liberation, equality, and touching on her own life and background. There is a particular poem that now is escaping. I need to find it now because I think about it all the time. There was a poem that she wrote about relationship between the colonies and Britain, and then touches on the idea of her relationship between herself and the father that she was snatched from in Africa. She doesn't really mention anything about her life before she was kidnapped and brought over on a slave ship as a child, but just that tiny, tiny insight about her memories of her family that she was taken from was so moving, and I don't think I really would have picked up on it if it hadn't been explained to me like that. If any of this appeals to you, you'll love it. But I suspect that a lot of you will be thinking, oh, this one is not for me, and that's okay. That's okay. Just be happy and excited that this exists and that this information is available, and celebrate that Phillis Wheatley was brilliant. She was a poet. She was a philosopher. She died at the age of 31. She was able to do so much with extremely limited resources, and this gave me so much insight into her life and appreciation for what she was able to do. It made me sad that we don't know more about her, what she thought about certain topics. I would love to know. what Phillis Wheatley thought about literally anything, just any kind of events or topics or philosophical musings. I want to know everything, and there's just so much that we don't have and that we don't know. The third and final biography about figures from Black history that I read in the month of February was Thurgood Marshall, American Revolutionary by Juan Williams. This one also very long. I would say easier to read than The Odyssey of Phillis Wheatley, but again, would probably only appeal to history nerds like myself. I do wish that the writing had a bit more pizzazz, but other than that, I would say that this book was excellent. That was just it. I just wish that there was a bit more personality in the writing style, but the writing is still really good. I really enjoyed it, especially the last chapter, which is just a conclusion, looking at all of the accomplishments of Thurgood Marshall and reflecting on what that means for our day after his death was so powerful. Really made me feel things in my soul. So Thurgood Marshall was the first Black U.S. Supreme Court justice, but before he became a U.S. Supreme Court justice in the 70s, he was this very prolific, influential lawyer for the NAACP in the Civil Rights Movement. He actually was one of the main figures that drove the Brown versus Board of Education case that integrated schools in America. He also did a lot of work related to false accusations against and false imprisonment of Black people. He did a lot of work legally fighting segregation throughout America, a lot of fighting Jim Crow laws. This gives so much insight into the conditions that Black people had to live under Jim Crow laws and the hatred and violence that those laws sanctioned and encouraged. I learned a lot about what it was like to live amongst that and to fight against that. But what I also thought was really great about this biography was that it included so many really interesting, fun details about Thurgood Marshall's life, a lot about his family, the kind of person that he was, to what he was like to be around. He was like the life of the party, and a lot of his success as a lawyer and as a Supreme Court justice came because he was so personable and made such warm, strong connections with people, and that really helped him collaborate with people that might be seen as part of the opposition. Also, just lots of funny anecdotes and quirky details about hijinks he got up to. He loved to party. He was a troublemaker and a prankster when he was in college. He did not get straight A's when he was in high school. And then also, I found it to be very objective because this is a man who accomplished so much and contributed so heavily to gaining more equal rights in America, but he also had so many flaws, and this book was really upfront about that. I mean, he was a bit of a womanizer while married as he was traveling around the country fighting cases, but then especially near the end of his life, as just kind of this crotchety old man refusing to give up his seat on the Supreme Court, just said a lot of out-of-pocket stuff, some of which I think was really funny, and he was right, but some of which was kind of inappropriate, kind of unhelpful, kind of harmful. It includes all of it. It really shows exactly what he was like and what a great, important, incredible man he was, and how difficult he was, and why some people didn't like him, whether that was unfounded or founded. Again, if you don't like history, if you don't care, you're not going to like this one. If you can get through all 400 pages, if you're not scared by that page number, I really thought that this one was a really important and exciting read. So take what you will from this video. If any of these interest you, please let me know which one you'll be most likely to read in the comments. Also, let me know what you read in the month of February in order to learn more about Black history and to elevate Black voices. I will try and link some of the things that I talked about, just shorter articles, so that if you want to learn more about these topics but you don't want to read an entire book, I still think it's important that you add to your knowledge of these parts of history. Did this video feel a little more solemn? I was trying really hard to just choose my words very carefully. I didn't want to really make light of any of the topics that a lot of these books touched on. I hope that doesn't make this seem very grim and depressing. I was a little depressed reading some of these. There was so many topics that came up that are not lighthearted and cheery to read about, but that's not going to stop me from continuing to expand my knowledge and understanding about every topic under the sun. I think these are so important, so vital, just towards our understanding of history and of things that are going on today. So I encourage you to at least read an article, read like a 2-minute article just to expand your understanding. And I will be updating you in a month about what I read for Women's History Month. This one I think will be a little bit more fun. I picked some books that are definitely more spread out in history, so I think I'll be able to have a bit more fun with talking about those. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!